Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue à cette deuxième journée de notre événement sur l'EDI et le secteur postsecondaire. Donc, encore une fois, le Cégep André Laurando est très heureux de vous accueillir à ces présentations sur ce sujet très important. Alors, sans plus tarder, comme on a déjà quelques minutes de retard, je vais vous présenter en fait Bibiana Pulido, qui va vous parler du déroulement de cette deuxième journée. Alors, merci. Au revoir.
Donc, bonjour tout le monde, en espérant que vous allez tous et toutes bien, ici en présentiel, mais aussi les personnes qui nous suivent en ligne. J'espère quand même que vous avez pu apprécier la journée d'hier et que quand même il y a pu y avoir des apprentissages. Je vais rappeler quelques petits aspects techniques avant de juste laisser quelques mots. N'oubliez pas que vous avez de la transcription et de l'interprétation simultanée. Vous avez un code QR ici pour pouvoir suivre ça. Honnêtement, vous nous direz, mais nous, on a un peu regardé, on disait que c'est la première fois qu'on essayait un logiciel comme ça. Je ne sais pas qu'est-ce que vous en pensez, mais nous, on a regardé, puis je pense que c'est quand même bien, là, à l'exception de quelques acronymes. Donc ici, le code de conduite, si vous n'avez pas eu l'occasion de pouvoir le lire, allez le consulter. Et je vais juste revenir avec la programmation. Donc, ce matin, on va avoir un beau panel qui va être animé par Serge Villemur, qui va notamment faire référence au contexte sociopolitique actuel. Hier, on a pu en parler. On le sait qu'au niveau du gouvernement, le projet Dimension n'a pas été renouvelé. Donc, un projet qui a pris plusieurs années à être bâti. 17 universités et personnes qui ont été impliquées dans la co-création et tout le matériel qui a été bâti. Puis effectivement, comme vous avez pu le voir hier, c'est vraiment dommage que tous ces investissements financiers et humains ne soient pas reconduits, vraiment tous des investissements, puis pour finalement que Dimension ne soit pas renouvelée et que ça n'ait pas été une annonce, je dirais, plus officielle. Donc, en quelque sorte, ça nous fait nous questionner, tu sais, c'est où les investissements? On prône l'équité, la diversité et l'inclusion au niveau du gouvernement fédéral, mais réellement, est-ce que des situations comme celle-ci nous questionnent si l'environnement sociopolitique, je dirais global, n'a pas un impact ici dans l'écosystème de la recherche. On a aussi remarqué, puis c'est très bien, que pas tout le monde connaît Dimension. Donc, c'est correct de ne pas connaître les technicalités, à quoi ça consiste. Le handbook est quand même long à lire, mais pour les personnes qui n'ont pas encore exploré ce matériel-là, puis vous voulez mener des démarches en EDI et tout ça, je trouve que c'est une première lecture qui peut être intéressante. Vous pourrez dire, nous, dans nos institutions, on débute, on n'a pas les ressources, mais quand même, il y a des choses intéressantes. Puis finalement, qu'est-ce que je voulais vous dire de quelque chose de plus positif? On a un humoriste avec nous aujourd'hui. Il est derrière la caméra. Il s'appelle Rolly. Donc, si vous n'avez pas eu l'occasion de voir ses shows, son Instagram, notamment, il vient de sortir quelques capsules sur quelques préjugés. C'est pas parce qu'on le connaît que c'est un, mais il est vraiment excellent. Peut-être vous l'avez vu aussi dans les pubs de Interac qui sortent sur LinkedIn. Donc, vraiment une star qu'on a parmi nous. N'hésitez pas à aller prendre un autographe, à en savoir davantage. Une personne formidable. Il est super gêné, il se cache vraiment, il ne veut même pas me regarder. Alors, Rolly, j'ai perdu mon crayon. Mais allez voir Rolly. Et là, sur ça, je vous laisse avec Serge.
Non, merci beaucoup, Viviana. C'est un plaisir pour moi ce matin d'animer le prochain panel. En me préparant pour le panel, je regardais... Est-ce que ça va la... En me préparant pour le panel, je parcourais un peu Internet, puis je regardais différentes définitions de l'excellence et de l'excellence en recherche, puis il y en a énormément. Donc, c'est un sujet très d'actualité, puis d'après mes expériences au CRSND, j'ai toujours trouvé que la définition qu'on avait de l'excellence était très restreinte. Alors, je crois que ça va être... on va se faire présenter des points de vue très intéressants, mais j'ai lu sur un des sites, je crois que c'était Nature Index, qui définissait la recherche de haute qualité ou excellente comme une recherche qui devrait commencer par un processus d'auto-réflexion avec une intention de solutionner des problèmes sociaux, économiques et environnementaux. Et la définition ne devrait-elle pas dépendre de contextes spécifiques, parfois même propres à certains environnements, certaines régions ou certains groupes. Donc, sans le mentionner, puis en lisant cette définition-là, sans le mentionner spécifiquement, les lignes que je viens de citer, qu'on ne comprennent-elles pas les bases de l'EDI? Donc, sans le mentionner. Donc, on peut faire de l'EDI sans mentionner qu'on fait de l'EDI, puis peut-être dans certains milieux, ça va peut-être mieux passer. Par ailleurs, depuis quelques années, faire avancer la notion d'excellence est avéré de plus en plus difficile, même s'il est très bien documenté que l'EDI représente une composante essentielle de l'excellence en recherche. Et depuis quelque temps, la résistance face à l'EDI dans le discours sociétal semble s'être accrue. On en a, comme Bibiana l'a mentionné, on en a parlé beaucoup hier. On se souviendra du refus du gouvernement du Québec d'appuyer une motion sur l'intersectionnalité et des opinions peu ou pas informées qui ont suivi par la suite dans les médias. Il y a eu le recul des fonds de recherche du Québec concernant l'intégration de l'EDI et des objectifs de développement durable dans sa programmation. Le non-renouvellement du programme Dimension, qui pourtant, il y a 5 ans, était une priorité gouvernementale. On se faisait dire que c'était même une priorité pour le premier ministre. Alors, qu'est-ce qui explique un changement de cap si rapide et un non-renouvellement du programme? Puis, je ne parlerai pas des actualités qui nous proviennent des autres provinces canadiennes ou des États-Unis, où encore là, c'est un peu sombre. Donc, la résistance est bien là et l'EDI est blâmé pour tous les maux. Il y avait un article dernièrement dans The Conversation qui parlait que l'EDI a été blâmé pour un pont qui s'écroule à Baltimore, pour une porte d'avion qui a tombé et bien d'autres choses. Donc, il y a beaucoup de commentaires à l'effet que lorsqu'on fait de l'EDI, on diminue nos standards d'excellence. C'est encore très, très présent. Donc, un autre mythe à combattre. J'aimerais remercier les panélistes d'avoir accepté de nous entretenir sur ces enjeux aujourd'hui. Malgré mon introduction qui est un peu négative ou un peu sombre, il y a beaucoup d'espoir car l'évidence est bien là. Et il y a beaucoup d'initiatives qui peut-être souvent ne sont pas visibles, mais qui sont bien là pour contrer cette résistance. Donc, les choses avancent. Donc, j'aimerais vous présenter les panélistes à l'instant et leur demander de venir à l'avant, s'il vous plaît. So, I'd like to introduce you to the panelists and ask them to come up to the front. Non, mais pas d'autre. OK, donc je commence avec Ève Langelier. Le professeur Langelier est titulaire de la chaire pour les femmes en sciences et en génie du Québec et est professeur titulaire au département de génie mécanique de l'Université de Sherbrooke. Avec son équipe, elle s'implique activement dans le recrutement, la rétention et le développement professionnel des filles et des femmes en sciences et génie. Elle souhaite entre autres démystifier les sciences et le génie et en faire connaître la portée sociale, offrir des modèles de femmes dans le milieu et outiller les femmes ayant pris ce chemin pour qu'elles y restent et progressent. Elle travaille aussi à sensibiliser les parents, le personnel enseignant, les collègues et les employeurs aux défis rencontrés par les femmes en sciences et génie. Bienvenue, Ève. Dr. Arij Al-Sheba. Dr. Al-Sheba is a scholar practitioner. She has been working in higher education for over 20 years in various administrative roles, while also holding faculty appointments. Currently, Dr. Al-Sheba is the Associate Vice President, Equity and Inclusion at the University of British Columbia. Her areas of academic and professional interest and experience relate to student success, EDI, intergroup relations, race and racism, leadership, and organizational theory for equity in higher education. She is engaged in EDI-related research, where she examines questions of how to effectively build individual and institutional capacity for equitable, inclusive, and anti-racist leadership and organizational change in higher education. Our third panelist, I don't think she's here yet, right? Mrs. Karine Cohen-Sanchez. I'll introduce her anyway. Mrs. Karine Cohen-Sanchez is a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Ottawa. She is an engaged activist, organizer, and scholar. Mrs. Cohen-Sanchez has worked to forge relationships and initiate systemic change among Black and racialized graduate students in Canada. She has steered anti-racism initiatives on her home campus as well as on a national stage, including stakeholder mobilization efforts, the development of institutional diversity and inclusivity statements, and the hosting of community-building events. Mrs. Cohen-Sanchez is a frequent participant in webinars and panel discussions dealing with race and racism in Canadian higher education, and she currently serves as co-chair of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Advisory Committee to address anti-Black racism. So I'd like to a warm welcome to Dr. Al-Sheba and Dr. Langelier, Professor Langelier, and hopefully Karine Cohen-Sanchez will join us soon. So our first speaker will be Professor Langelier, who has a PowerPoint presentation. So we'll take a second just to set it up. Do I need to do... Faut que je fasse quelque chose pour... Non? OK.
Je peux pas l'avoir fait. Faut-il faire l'histoire? On the moment I got, where were you? Yeah.
On va réajuster les hauteurs un peu. Donc, bonjour, ça me fait plaisir d'être ici. Je vous dirais que quand Serge m'a demandé de parler de ce sujet, je trouve ça vraiment cool. Quand j'ai commencé à préparer le PowerPoint, j'ai fait « Ouh, faut que je réfléchisse! » Mais c'était une réflexion vraiment enrichissante que j'aurais aimé avoir plus de temps pour y réfléchir encore plus, en fait. Donc, le titre, c'est « Comment mettre en pratique une définition de l'excellence en recherche ». Donc, j'ai commencé par dire, on va décomposer la question, qu'est-ce que l'excellence en recherche et ensuite, comment mettre en pratique ceci. Donc, c'est ça mes deux premiers objectifs. Puis, j'ai fait quelques recommandations. Humbles recommandations. Donc, définir l'excellence en recherche. En réfléchissant, je me suis dit, on a deux façons de voir l'excellence en recherche. Une façon collective puis une façon individuelle. Collective, en fait, collective, c'est le gouvernement. Okay? Le gouvernement ou un organisme subventionnaire, par exemple, comment voit sa définition de l'excellence en recherche et un individu, comment est-ce qu'on évalue un individu, donc son excellence en recherche. Donc, je me suis dit, du côté de la collectivité, pourquoi on veut définir l'excellence en recherche? Parce qu'on veut se positionner au niveau international, parce qu'on veut attirer des talents, on veut attirer des investissements, répondre à des problèmes sociétaux, on veut faire rouler l'économie. Donc, c'est important qu'on ait une communauté, une collectivité excellente en recherche. Du côté individuel, je veux une bourse
quand je suis aux études. Je veux une subvention pour faire rouler ma recherche. Je veux être embauchée. Je veux avoir une promotion. Donc, c'est moi-même, un individu qu'on examine et ça va être tout au long de sa carrière. Oh, là, vous ne voyez plus, mais il y a des affaires qui apparaissent à l'écran. Donc, en fait, ça implique l'excellence, définir l'excellence en recherche, ça implique une variété d'organisations. Donc, ça implique des universités, ça implique des organismes subventionnaires, par exemple. C'est un écosystème. Il y a des entreprises privées aussi, parce que maintenant, on fait beaucoup de recherches avec les entreprises, etc. Ça touche les individus à différents moments dans leur parcours. Puis, on a des ressources limitées. Je vais y revenir, mais comme on a des ressources limitées, il faut d'une certaine façon à sélectionner à qui on donne des sous. Donc, on utilise l'excellence aussi pour ça. Donc là, je ne veux pas que vous lisiez tout. C'est plus pour m'aider moi, mais j'ai mis 2 exemples, si je peux dire ainsi, de définition de l'excellence. C'est pas tout à fait ça, mais ici, le RSNG, veut justement avoir des retombées, approfondir les connaissances, résoudre des problèmes locaux, internationaux, etc. Et pour ça, on veut qu'il y ait un accès équitable au financement. On veut que dans la conception des programmes de recherche, on tienne en compte l'équité, la diversité et l'inclusion. On veut accroître une participation inclusive et équitable parce qu'on veut avoir plusieurs talents qui contribuent. Si on regarde du point de vue universitaire maintenant, j'ai sorti McMaster University. Donc, l'excellence inclusive, c'est un concept qui reconnaît la relation entre la diversité et la qualité en recherche, en enseignement, en service et en gouvernance. Donc, d'un côté, on n'a pas les mêmes objectifs si on est une université, par exemple, parce qu'on voit ça plus largement, je pourrais dire, avec différents volets qu'on n'a pas en recherche, parce qu'en recherche, c'est seulement la recherche. À l'université, on voit aussi l'enseignement, la formation, on le voit un peu là, en recherche, la formation des étudiants gradués, étudiantes graduées, personnel qui travaillent. Mais donc, on a comme des objectifs qui ne sont pas exactement alignés. Donc, les parties prenantes n'ont pas toutes les mêmes portées, n'ont pas donc tous les mêmes objectifs. Puis si on regarde aussi du côté individuel, il faut, comme je vous disais tout à l'heure, distribuer les ressources. Donc, il faut évaluer. Puis aujourd'hui, ce qu'on fait, c'est qu'on utilise une évaluation, en gros, méritocratique. Donc, premièrement, une des choses sur lesquelles on se base, c'est la bibliométrie, donc le nombre de publications, par exemple. Par contre, ça peut avoir l'air d'un indicateur qui est impartial, mais un indicateur qui est impartial, qui est intégré dans un système qui est biaisé. Par exemple, les femmes sont moins citées que les hommes. OK, bien, ça peut faire des résultats qui vont être eux-mêmes biaisés. Aussi, bien, c'est des données qui sont quantitatives, mais qui limitent. OK, c'est comme juste une certaine vision de tout le qualitatif qui est en arrière. Donc, c'est limité comme portée. On se base aussi sur l'évaluation par les pairs. Mais souvent, les critères sont très, très abstraits, les critères d'évaluation, et donc laissent place à interprétation des personnes qui vont évaluer. Et donc, ça peut aussi avoir un lien avec les cultures épistémiques. C'est un mot que j'ai appris en faisant la recherche. Culture épistémique, dans le fond, dans un certain domaine ou dans un certain groupe, on définit l'excellence de telle façon. Donc, si on n'a pas nécessairement, on ne colle pas à cette vision-là, on n'est pas dans cette culture-là, mais ça peut avoir un impact sur la façon dont on est influencé. L'excellence aussi, c'est un construit social, donc il y a des biais potentiels, c'est certain. Culture épistémique, j'en ai reparlé. Et donc, souvent aussi, les personnes évaluatrices vont préférer les propositions qui sont similaires aux autres. C'est un genre à ce que eux, de la façon dont ces personnes-là voient les choses. Ça, c'est une des conséquences. Donc, c'est important de redéfinir ou de réfléchir à qu'est-ce que c'est l'excellence en recherche. Donc, encore une fois, si je reviens à l'aspect collectivité, mais pourquoi? Entre autres, on voit que la culture actuelle mène à un grand nombre de publications, mais ça ne veut pas nécessairement dire que c'est de la science de qualité. On le sait, hein, pour innover, pour générer des retombées, approfondir nos connaissances, résoudre des problèmes complexes, on a besoin de la participation de différentes personnes avec différents profils, différentes expériences qui vont amener différentes perspectives, différentes préoccupations, aussi différentes compétences. Du côté individu, on a besoin aussi d'évaluer l'impact ou la contribution des personnes selon leur expérience ou selon leur vécu ou selon leur réalité. Okay, on sait que certaines personnes ont plus de temps à mettre en recherche, d'autres en ont moins, d'autres ont à côté dans leur vie des défis, des enjeux, etc. Donc, il faut en tenir compte. Puis aussi, on veut sortir de... Là, j'ai cité, parce que j'aurais peut-être mis les mots un peu différemment, mais l'image dominante de l'excellence scientifique qui repose plus ou moins sur un modèle de carrière traditionnel, hein? Donc, dévouement absolu à la science. Donc, l'idée qu'on peut faire autre chose, mais quand même prendre le temps de réfléchir. Et quand on fait de la science, on fait de l'excellente science. Et là, je me suis posé la question, puis je n'ai pas la réponse. Est-ce qu'une définition unique de l'excellence est réaliste? Est-ce qu'il en faudrait deux du point de vue de ce qu'on voit? Je n'ai pas la réponse. Maintenant, mettons qu'on aurait une définition de l'excellence. Comment est-ce qu'on la mettrait en pratique? Là, je suis prof en génie, fait que j'enseigne le cours processus créatif de résolution de problèmes. Donc là, j'ai ressorti cet aspect-là en moi. Puis je me suis dit, c'est un problème complexe, qui est flou, il y a des nuances, il n'est pas certainement bien défini et il est ouvert, il n'y a pas une réponse unique. Donc, il faut qu'on utilise un processus, sinon on va se perdre dans ce qu'on va faire. Donc, le processus que je propose, c'est définir le problème, rechercher des solutions et planifier la mise en œuvre. Définir le problème, dans les processus comme ça, comment on fonctionne, c'est on diverge, on met notre chapeau créatif, positif, puis on sort le plus d'idées possible. Puis après, on met notre chapeau critique, on analyse, puis on cherche la meilleure solution. Première partie, définir le problème, on fait la même chose. On diverge, on va chercher toute l'information disponible. Donc, c'est quoi la définition qu'on veut mettre en œuvre? C'est qui les parties prenantes? OK, je pense que des fois, on oublie certaines parties prenantes dans nos réflexions. C'est quoi aussi les personnes qui s'engagent dans ce changement-là? C'est quoi leur rôle, leur responsabilité, leur pouvoir et leurs ressources? Des fois, on voudrait changer le monde, mais moi, mon pouvoir, il est à cette échelle-là. Donc, qu'est-ce que je peux faire peut-être à cette échelle-là avec les ressources que j'ai? Je pense que c'est quelque chose d'important à réfléchir. On en a parlé, le contexte sociopolitique. C'est sûr qu'il faut aller chercher des données sur le contexte parce que ça va influencer ce qu'on va mettre en place, du moins dans le temps. Peut-être qu'on va mettre des choses en place plus tard ou peut-être que là, ce n'est pas le bon moment. Puis vraiment bien identifier actuellement c'est quoi les failles, OK, ou peut-être les points forts aussi de ce qu'on fait. Il y a une partie de ça, cette réflexion-là, qui est déjà faite, OK? Puis après ça, une fois qu'on a toute l'information, on fait le ménage, OK? On prend l'information vraiment utile, puis on redéfinit notre problème. On cadre très bien notre problème. Ici, j'ai mis attention aux ailleurs et aux angles morts. OK? Je vous donne un exemple, je vous sors un peu du contexte, mais en génie, les étudiants et les étudiantes, souvent, vont résoudre un problème, concevoir un produit selon leur vision, qu'est-ce qu'ils aimeraient eux autres pour le produit. Un exercice que je vais faire, c'est je fais simuler le vieillissement pour que les gens se rendent compte, mettre dans la tête de « OK, moi, comme jeune adulte, je n'ai pas pensé que la personne vieillissante, par exemple, pouvait avoir tel défi. » Un exemple, il y a un étudiant qui a mis des bouchons dans ses oreilles pour diminuer son ouïe. Il était allé à un party. Puis à la fin de la soirée, il était tout seul parce qu'il était tanné de répéter, puis les gens étaient tannés de le faire répéter. Mais s'il n'avait pas vécu cette expérience-là, il n'aurait pas pensé nécessairement qu'une personne âgée peut vivre ce défi-là. Et si je conçois un produit, mais ça peut être un service, ça peut être différentes choses. OK, je pouvais faire taper les doigts pour faire de l'arthrite. Il y avait plusieurs choses, diminuer la vision, etc. Mais l'idée, c'est pas que cette personne-là, que nous, comme individus, on essaye de se mettre dans la peau des autres. C'est de dire, attention, tu as peut-être des angles morts, va chercher le point de vue des personnes concernées. Donc, ça, pour moi, c'est un point très, très, très important qu'on oublie souvent. Ensuite, si on a cerné le problème, phase de divergence, on peut faire une revue littérature, une recension des écrits. Qu'est-ce qui a été fait ailleurs? Qu'est-ce qui fonctionne? OK? Donc, quoi, comment, quelle méthode? Est-ce que ça a été évalué? Puis, un exemple que j'ai trouvé qui avait été cité, c'est le CV narratif dans les Pays-Bas. Et ce que j'ai aimé de cette proposition-là, c'est quand on évalue la contribution d'une personne, on évalue en fonction du pourcentage de temps qu'elle met à la recherche. Donc, si j'ai quelqu'un qui met 90 % de son temps à la recherche et quelqu'un d'autre qui en met 10 % mais ils ne seront pas évalués selon la même performance. Parce que souvent, le défi, c'est qu'on évalue la performance et non la qualité. Ça, c'est mon point de vue personnel. Et donc, comment on peut placer les choses autrement, mettre les choses en perspective. Et aussi, on reconnaît différentes sortes de contributions, pas seulement les publications scientifiques. Hier, j'ai appris dans une réunion que les chercheuses sourdes, malentendantes, sont des vidéos avec le langage des signes qui sont scientifiques, mais ce n'est pas reconnu nécessairement comme des publications scientifiques dans l'évaluation. Bref, faire des groupes de discussion, des brainstorming, je prends plus de temps que je pensais. Ensuite, on converge. Plus ce qui est important, c'est vraiment d'avoir des critères. On ne fait pas juste converger pour dire « Ah, cette idée-là me tente, ça a l'air le fun ». Attention aux angles morts. Et mon dernier point, c'est planifier la mise en œuvre. Et ici, je vais mettre le focus sur repérer nos sources, nos forces motrices, nos sources d'appui, mais identifier nos sources de résistance. Ça ne veut pas dire de tout baser sur les sources de résistance, mais si on les néglige, on peut se trouver dans le trouble. Je vais passer plus vite, tester, évaluer. 5 minutes? Oh, OK. C'est bon, j'étais stressée, là. Il reste 2 slides. Puis ici, j'ai remis mon petit graphique. Pourquoi? Parce que si je trouve des sources de résistance, par exemple, mais je peux repartir mon processus pour dire, OK, comment je pourrais déjouer ces sources de résistance-là? Comment je pourrais en faire un appui? Comment je pourrais minimiser leur impact? OK, c'est ce que je vous propose comme graphique. C'est pas un processus linéaire, c'est un processus agile qu'on peut faire plusieurs fois, retourner en arrière, qu'on peut faire plusieurs boucles, c'est très important. J'ai réfléchi. Ici, c'était pour vous donner des idées, c'est très, très petit. Si vous voulez les slides, je pourrais vous les envoyer. Mais les sources de résistance, on peut se poser les questions qui? Qui peut être une source de résistance? Quand? Est-ce qu'il y a un moment que ce n'est pas un bon moment pour faire une action? Est-ce qu'il y a un sujet que ce n'est pas un bon moment, ça peut être une source de résistance? Est-ce qu'il y a un endroit, par exemple? On peut se poser des questions pour nous aider à trouver. J'ai regardé rapidement ce qui est venu pour moi, c'est tout ce qui est en lien avec le changement de culture et de comportement. Donc, il y a un besoin que moi je vois, mais les autres ne le voient pas. Donc, ils n'auront pas envie de changer. Et on manque d'informations, on ne comprend pas ce qu'on nous demande ou pourquoi, ou on vit de la désinformation. On peut avoir peur du changement, okay? Ou on peut voir en avant de nous une grande courbe d'apprentissage, puis ça ne nous tente pas, par exemple. Des ressources, qu'est-ce que j'ai? Oh, mon calendrier est vraiment serré, par exemple, ça pourrait être un défi. Je n'ai pas beaucoup de finances, c'est des choses qu'on vit. Contexte social, bon, je pense qu'on en a déjà parlé, mais on pourrait dire qu'on ramène un peu la liberté d'expression, ou la liberté en recherche, ou la polarisation. Ça peut être des défis. Puis il y a le contexte politique. Est-ce que c'est une année électorale? Est-ce que j'ai un gouvernement minoritaire? Et là, la politique va embarquer dans ça. Donc, mes humbles recommandations. Réfléchir, est-ce qu'il y a une définition unique et universelle de l'excellence? Ou ça en prend plusieurs selon le contexte? Inclure toutes les parties prenantes. OK? Donc, des personnes étudiantes, des personnes professionnelles, des personnes enseignantes, mais aussi des gens du privé qui collaborent en recherche, aussi des gens qui gouvernent les universités. Là, je n'aimerais pas tout le monde, mais les organismes subventionnaires et les universités. Utiliser un processus agile et non linéaire. OK. Faire attention à nos angles morts. Puis prendre en compte les sources de résistance sans mettre 100% de nos efforts là-dessus, mais je pense qu'il faut savoir qu'elles sont toujours là. Donc, je voulais remercier nos commanditaires à la chaire, mais aussi les personnes qui ont alimenté la réflexion, dont le groupe de recherche, dont le groupe de réflexion sur l'excellence inclusive. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Eve. Tu nous as vraiment exposé la complexité de l'excellence en un temps record. Il y a beaucoup de matériel dans ce que tu as présenté. Très intéressant, le concept de définir l'excellence de trop baser l'évaluation de l'excellence dans des contextes individuels. Lorsqu'on veut régler des grands problèmes sociétaux, il faut travailler au niveau collectif. Donc, très, très intéressant. Et je crois que la Nouvelle-Zélande qui a fait beaucoup de progrès aussi sur l'évaluation de la recherche selon l'opportunité, où on pourrait beaucoup apprendre aussi. Donc, très, très intéressant. Puis, tu nous as laissé avec des questions très pertinentes qui vont peut-être sûrement générer beaucoup de questionnements dans nos têtes. Donc, merci beaucoup. On va passer à notre deuxième panéliste. We'll go to our second panelist. So I would invite Dr. Al Shebai to come up to the microphone. Thank you very much.
Great. Does this work? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Great. So good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be participating in this important gathering of minds and to be in person. I've been asked to comment on the key issues facing universities in moving forward with their EDI strategies, particularly in the context of the current sociopolitical moment. I want to preface that my comments relate to my work on and in English language research-intensive universities, but I hope my remarks resonate for the college sector and for French language institutions. So efforts to advance EDI have always experienced fits and starts, and perhaps there can be no better indicator of this oscillating momentum than the ever-changing language that institutions use based on what society in the sector has found most palatable at any given moment, from language of human rights and employment equity, to educational access and equity, to diversity and inclusion, to belonging and respect, to EDI and inclusive excellence, and even to anti-racism and JEDI, and now maybe back to just belonging and respect. We are at an important inflection point as we navigate two major sociopolitical phenomena acting in the moment. The first sociopolitical issue relates to mounting backlash, as we've all commented on, against campus EDI efforts, which has been quite pronounced in the United States. In Canada, this sentiment is also present, though not manifesting yet, in wholesale dismantling of EDI infrastructure at institutions, Dimensions program notwithstanding. We do, however, know that there are segments of our population, including politicians, who are giving a nod to, if not joining the anti-EDI movement, evidence in the rise of xenophobia and hate crimes, as well as attempts to introduce legislation that would remove the rights of SOGI children and youth, as well as ban cultural and religious garments and symbols in certain spaces, for example. Most troubling about this wave of resistance is the deliberate campaign to co-opt the term EDI with a narrative that grossly distorts its goals and methods, and to malign and disparage those of us that are doing the work. The tensions on campus relating to this issue stem from the question of whether and how university leaders will lean into their articulated values and commitments to protect the EDI gains we have made and propel them into the future, or if there will be a capitulation and rolling back of investments in response to any implicit or explicit pressures from external and internal stakeholders. The second sociopolitical issue relates to the most recent escalation of violence and human toll and loss of life in the long-standing Israel-Palestine conflict, the impacts of which have manifested in experiences of silencing, exclusion, and hostility on campus among Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, Israeli, and Jewish people alike, as well as among those who choose to vocalize any number of diverse perspectives on the conflict. The tensions on campus related to this issue stem from two questions. The question of the appropriate role of the contemporary university in the face of such socio- and geopolitical events in our increasingly globally connected society, and the question of the capacity of senior leaders, let alone the campus community, to embody and navigate foundational higher educational ideals of academic freedom and open inquiry, human rights and social equity, as well as academic integrity and excellence. Now is the time for leaders across the sector ecosystem to come together with EDI scholars and practitioners to thoughtfully assess the phenomena at play and plan for the mitigation of risks and strengthening of protective factors to prevent further erosion of gains or knee-jerk dismantling of programming. An interesting data point comes from the national survey conducted by Nanos Research in 2023, which found that universities continue to be seen as the top contributors to Canada being a better country. This says to me that a vast number of and diversity of citizens in and outside of our institutions expect that higher education will positively impact the quality of life in Canada, and equitable treatment and opportunities must certainly factor into that notion of quality of life. So, we should make no mistake that our campus EDI efforts are needed to enable institutions to deliver on their promise to contribute to educational equity, but also social betterment. Compliance is useful and has been useful to a degree. Regulatory and permissive legal provisions in human rights and employment equity laws have been very helpful to date, but we need broader cultural change so that we don't have to rely on or are not vulnerable to changes in compliance measures and external recognition and incentive programs to advance EDI. We still have a cultural challenge in the academic and research ecosystem, and that is a considerable number of influencers either do not understand or are not convinced by the case for EDI. With a renewed wave of resistance, academic leaders, and not just equity leads and advisors, but academic leaders must be able to compellingly and frequently articulate diversity benefits, barriers, and best practices, highlighting once again the evidence that diversity and inclusion indeed improve innovation and performance, the evidence that personally mediated implicit bias and systemic inequities persist and have profound effects, and the evidence that best practices do exist to promote systems and culture change for lasting transformation. So let me turn now to speak to three challenges and opportunities for more transformative change, and these are more important than ever to successfully ride the waves of resistance. The first challenge and opportunity I want to discuss relates to the role of the senior equity leader, positions like myself, and their vertical authority or span of control. In the last 5 years, there has been a proliferation of senior equity roles. In large part, this trend is connected to the introduction of more EDI requirements by granting agencies, a testament to the leverage that policy interventions tied to research funds can have in this space. An internet search of the organizational structures of the U15 group of Canada Research universities reveals that 13 of 15 have senior administrative or academic positions with titles or mandates explicitly referencing EDI. Only 5 of these roles existed in 2019. And there are many other roles, such roles that have emerged in non-U15 universities and in the college sector. 10 of the 13 U15 universities have a vice provost, associate provost, or associate vice president heading up a unit-based organizational structure, overseeing a core EDI office team with some administrative support staff, as well as program specialists and a relatively small program budget. 3 of the 13 universities report to a president and have a portfolio division model overseeing an EDI office team, along with a constellation of EDI-related or adjacent units. They have larger staff teams and a larger budget, and these cabinet-level equity leaders have the greatest opportunity for direct collaboration with and influence on other senior administrators to advance EDI. Since 2019, at least one college and 4 non-U15 universities have also recruited cabinet-level senior equity roles. These numbers suggest a possible trend towards ensuring greater span of control for senior equity leads, at least in large and research-intensive universities. However, that said, a considerable number of institutions have a single equity lead championing this work or no equity lead. Perhaps the sector should consider an interinstitutional program to ensure that universities with greater resources to advance EDI can mentor and support those with fewer resources in their regions. As the size of a university or college may dictate the organizational structure for equity leadership, the important takeaway here is to bring the senior equity lead or advisor closer to the center of decision-making and direction setting to ensure that they are sufficiently empowered and have the authority to influence work across academic and administrative portfolios, whatever the context of the institution. Okay. Does this mean they didn't hear everything else I said? Okay. Thank you. The second challenge and opportunity relates to what Adalberto and Aguirre and Ruben Martinez refer to as diverse and diversity leadership. So diverse leadership refers to the compositional diversity of leaders with respect to the representation of historically, persistently, and systemically marginalized groups. It's about lived experience. Diversity leadership refers to the capacity of leaders to enable their own transformation and the transformation of the institutions in which they lead. It's about critical consciousness and EDI competencies. We have all observed the trend towards more and stronger articulations of commitments to advancing EDI across the sector. However, we have also been rightfully skeptical because these commitments often remain performative or lack integration with core academic and research activities. While commitment is one of the 6 qualities of inclusive leadership, according to Juliet Bork's 2016 Deloitte Leadership Study, my view is that the most important of the 6 qualities she identifies is courage. The other 4 are cognizance, curiosity, cultural intelligence, and collaboration. Courageous leadership manifests, Courageous leadership manifests when leaders act on a sense of ownership of the problem and responsibility for change by leveraging their power to shift the status quo. It requires leaders to expand their individual mental schemas or worldviews, as well as to disrupt rigid institutional operating logics or paradigms that may hinder the pursuit of equity and inclusive excellence. Equitable hiring of leaders to develop diverse and diversity leadership is key. That said, some promising equitable hiring practices have come under scrutiny and have become highly contested. A recent example is the use of EDI statements of contribution in our hiring practices. There is a growing body of literature that speaks to the potential benefits of requesting these statements. However, there's relatively little guidance on how to ethically and lawfully use them in order to derive benefits without compromising the fundamental values and ideals I mentioned. It was just reported yesterday that MIT has become the first, quote, elite university to ban the use of diversity statements in hiring processes. We need to pay attention to these trends and be thoughtful about how we engage and give guidance about the use of EDI statements. The third challenge and opportunity relates to operationalizing strategic plans and fostering a culture of accountability. One of the reasons that transformative change is elusive is that institutions tend to fall into this trap of what Damon Williams refers to as a cyclical diversity crisis mode of planning. This is a reactive mode of planning that usually starts with a watershed event or externally motivating force, followed by commitments or initiatives in isolation from or absence of institutional strategic direction and investment. We need to return to first principles for strategic planning and change management with respect to EDI. At UBC, we've just completed our first Strategic Equity and Anti-Racism Progress Report, and I've made a point of highlighting for my executive colleagues the 3 challenges and opportunities I just discussed, as well as the following: supporting the health and well-being and building the sense of thriving and morale among faculty equity leads and equity practitioners, promoting equitable and inclusive models of shared governance, embodying a truly integrative notion of inclusive research, creating and curating effective programming to foster dialogue and understanding, remembering that inclusion facilitated by equity is the key that unlocks the promise and potential of diversity to stimulate innovation and excellence. Inclusion is the key to inclusive excellence. Measuring progress in terms of outcomes and impacts rather than only outputs and initiatives, while being mindful to analyze disaggregated and intersectional demographic data to uncover hidden inequities, and ensuring we collect experiential data that tells the story of the actual climate and culture that may be incongruent with the picture the numbers portray. So without intentional, embedded, internally driven, and well-resourced system-wide strategies, perhaps underpinned by a more robust sector-wide framework that considers the long game, efforts may continue to be reliant on and vulnerable to the political will and proficiencies of the leader of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Sheba. Another very interesting presentation with a lot of material in it. It's reassuring to see that the role of universities in Canada is still seen in a positive light, because there's certainly a portion of the society that's trying to discredit universities with questionable arguments. So reassuring to see. Another point that it's important to me, because that's my background as well, reassuring to see that the granting agencies have a lot of influence. And I've often heard that the granting agencies could exert more of this influence among the research community. So this is, in my opinion, very, very positive. We'll move on to the next speaker, Mrs. Karine Cohen-Sanchez, who will join us online. So Karine, I invite you to open your microphone and camera.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yep. Good.
So I'm not the typical, I am a typical academic presenter, but today I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start off by introducing a song that will put into perspective what I'm going to talk about. So can you guys hear the song? I don't know how to do it so you guys can hear it. So the reason I wanted to start with this song is because it's important. It's an important perspective in the conversation that we'll be having this morning. But if it's not going to work, it's fine. We'll just continue with it. Basically, the song starts, I am not my hair, I am not my skin, I am not my gender. What that means is to take a closer look to what inclusivity really means is to be able to see the content of the person. And like Martin Luther King says in his speech, is to look beyond the external factors and to look within the individual, their own skills, their own lived experiences, and so forth. So my discussion today is entitled Enhancing Inclusivity at Canadian University, and I'll be focusing on two spectrum bursary applications and services on campus. The section 1 is going to be about equity, diversity, and inclusion at University of Ottawa. And the section 2 is going to be specifically about how we can support more bursary application through an inclusive lens.
You just need to share because you're still at there's no sharing of the presentation. We could only see the first slide. And
oh, yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I'm learning.
It's okay, no worries.
Okay. So but you said that if I send you the video, you guys wouldn't be able to hear it, right? Okay, can you guys?
It's more related to the PowerPoint. Okay, so
okay, it's now
you have access. Okay, that's better.
It's better. Okay.
Video, you could probably put it in the chat, and we'll make.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you.
I'll do that. You're welcome. I'll start all over again so you guys can see the PowerPoints. As I mentioned, my conversation today, the dialogue today will be about enhancing inclusivity at Canadian universities, and I have broken down into 2 sections: equity, diversity, and inclusion at universities and Canadian universities. And the second section is going to be about bursary application and supporting campuses, being more supportive of your services on campuses, and how can that be done? What does it mean when people say an innovative environment? Empowering and mobilizing a full spectrum of ideas, talent, and perspective and experiences built on innovation. What that means is that your idea or your perspective of what innovation is or what is considered merit can fluctuate, and it is not static. It's inviting new ways of learning and new thought processes. That's what innovation is, and that's what inclusivity is. Inclusivity is being able to be your authentic self within the space and sharing those experiences within the space without being discredited for it, because it doesn't fit into the regimes of what is considered merit or what is considered intellectual capacities. Not having to modify my tone, my research lens, or my approach in order to comply with university standards. It's accepting the talents that are being presented as is. Supportive campus environment is welcoming, inclusive campus environment is important for the development of students. From a personal lens, when I started my PhD journey, I did not feel that my research idea was welcomed because it wasn't done before. There needs to be this change of narrative and thinking that because it wasn't written in books or somebody didn't study it before, that it can't be used in today's time. There needs to be a new way of approaching what is considered standardized academic merits. Rethinking scholarships. As Canadian universities and granting agencies move towards increasing EDI, it is essential to rethink scholarship programs to improve representation and inclusivity among recipients. As the co-chair of the SHRC's Anti-Black Racism, we did an entire report on some of the issues that surround retention of Black high schools, retentions of, high school going into higher learning, and retentions of higher learning Black students in their program. And majority of them that did not stay because they were not able to secure funding. And a lot of them, the people who were evaluating the funding that were being presented, did not have an understanding of the research that was being presented. For example, now there's a new buzzword of intersectionality, so everybody understands it. But 10 years ago, nobody really embraced that idea. It's the same thing with Afrocentric theories. If we put that in our applications, a lot of the people who are evaluating are not familiar with these types of knowledge. That creates a barrier. Is extending the evaluators that are receiving these scholarships their own knowledge in the process. Financial support in inclusive education. So providing financial support to students with an intersectionally marginalized identities through student awards and bursaries. We also found throughout our research as a member of the co-chair of SHRC, there was a lot of areas where students would be applying for bursaries, but they were not giving the same kind of attention from students from larger cities. So for students from near royal cities and the way the selection process was done through them, they were faced with a lot of barriers in terms of their own institution to transfer over the scholarship to SHRC. And then if it got the chance to be transferred over to SHRC, like I mentioned earlier, some of the evaluators just did not have the intellectual capacity to understand the material that was being presented. So when you don't understand something, you tend to dismiss it. There's also a new approach. It's called tuition reinvestment bursaries. It's an initiative that is need-based bursaries and scholarship programs that are pivotal in ensuring equitable access to education. These programs contribute a higher level of playing field for all students. Mental health and well-being. This is also a huge factor when we're speaking about inclusivity in education. there's an image of what is associated with mental health, and it doesn't really comply with marginalized communities. Studies have been done that a lot of Black students who seek mental health are dismissed by the healthcare system simply because they cannot be experiencing mental health issues because they are associated with having a higher tolerance of pain. That needs to be changed, and that approach needs to be reconsidered. So throughout that process, the essential element is to do some self-reflection. And as I always say, ask yourself why you do what you do, because the programming that in which we are involved in inherently creates biases and stereotypes within us, whether we are conscious or not conscious of it. Transformative initiative for inclusivity, policy advocacy. Universities play a significant role in advocating for equity, diversity, and inclusion by providing transformative initiatives. When I speak about policy advocacy, it's not necessarily the policy makers that need to take the lead. They need to include people that are affected in these marginalized communities in the decision making. So what that means is not necessarily just doing committees, but having their voices at the front line. We all know that things get lost in translation. So if you're going to include a committee, if you're going to form a committee and include marginalized communities, they have the right to express themselves and their needs at the front line, not being changed or modified through the lens of somebody else's lived experiences. Community engagement. It's important for a lot of people that are higher up administrators to actually get involved in the community. Like I mentioned earlier, yes, you can have various committees do a report and then take that report and then do a couple action plans. That itself is great, but getting involved directly with the community provides these policymakers with lived experiences through their interaction with various communities. Inclusive curriculum. An example of that is at the University of Ottawa. A lot of the curriculums never mentioned racist incidents that happen in the classroom. I worked with the dean in order to establish that, and we all know that we cannot force teachers or professors to include certain things in their curriculum, but we can advise them to include it. The same way that most curriculum have information about academic supports across campus, they can include if you're faced or you've experienced racist incidents, where you can go. That has successfully been implemented in a lot of the curriculums at the University of Ottawa, for example. What does that do? Mentioning that creates a space to recognize that there are systematic issues in institutions. Bursary application and supportive campuses. Access to bursaries, equitable opportunities. Ensuring that bursary applications are accessible and inclusive is vital for providing equitable opportunities to all students. Diverse eligibility. We've noticed that a lot of the bursary applications do not have sections where they discuss why you did not have a certain grade point average. They might have a section that say if you experience sickness, you could attach your medical information and then that will explain, but what if you had to work a lot, which is something that is not considered as a valuable impact in your GPA. A lot of students have to work in order to survive within the educational system. That will have an impact on their grades. So intellectual capacities have to be reevaluated in terms of what we are really looking for. We're looking for good grades, or we're looking for people that actually can create change through their various lived experiences. I think that would be a question that we have to analyze. Transparent selection process. Establishing a transparent and fair selection process for bursary awards. This goes back to my previous point. The people that are evaluating, are they equipped with understanding the information that are on these bursary applications? I created a checklist and I could share this with you guys if you wish. It's bilingual, it's in both French and English, to help professors who are completing letters of recommendation, what they should be saying in the letters of recommendation that will help the applicant. A lot of the professors are very busy and they are involved in their own lives. They don't really have an understanding exactly what can be said in the application that they might have overlooked when they are they're assisting their students to apply for these bursaries. Not everything is based on grades. There's a new way of approaching the curriculum and the whole entire process of evaluation. If we look beyond a social construction system that is based on grades equaling more intellectual capacities. There's people who don't have all the good grades, but are very, very intellectually sound. I'm almost done. Services on campuses for inclusive support. So there is, recently the University of Ottawa, I co-founded recently a Black mentorship program at the University of Ottawa. That would be considered inclusive support. Cultural awareness workshops. We have done many of these. Mentorship and guidance, like I mentioned, there's a Black mentorship program at the University of Ottawa. Diversity-centric programs. I was surprised to learn throughout all the workshops that I've done and throughout my engagement in the universities, in many different universities, Black feminism is something that is hardly spoken about in school, in university settings. There are students who are doing their backs, their masters, and go up to their PhD and say they've never taken a course in Black feminism. They have never taken a course in relations to history, but never in relation to slavery, but never in relation to the Haitian Revolution. It makes you question what they want to maintain in terms of narratives. And my final slide is collaborative initiatives for inclusivity. So student-driven advocacy is essential. If we're going to be addressing issues that students are having, students need to be the lead throughout this conversation. Empowering students to drive initiatives for inclusive and equitable creates a sense of ownership and fosters a culture of active participant in creating more inclusive campuses. Faculty and staff engagement. Yes, it's a collaborative approach, but the collaborative approach cannot be overpowered by saviorism either. There has to be space for the marginalized communities to voice their opinions. Exclusive campus infrastructures. Developing an inclusive campus infrastructure that address the driven needs of students, including physical accessibility, inclusive facilities, is essential for creating an environment where everyone feels valued and supported. That's it for me. I don't know if I went over time or not.
No, Karen, timing is perfect.
Okay. I'm trying to open it back up. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Karen. Another very relevant presentation. And I'm so sorry that we couldn't hear the song at the beginning. That would have been a nice start.
Yeah, I would have liked to share it, but I'm not too tech savvy, so I don't know what to say at this point.
If we have the link, I think we can listen to it later. That would be
okay. I'll share it in the chat now that I got it up and running again. But thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you. One quote I really liked is, if you don't understand something, you dismiss it. How relevant that kind of work that we are doing. So very important. And also, one thing that I find very disturbing is the issue on mental health. And perhaps mental health is something that we don't talk enough about in EDI. But the myth that members of equity deserving groups are more resilient to pain and stress is mind-boggling to hear. So thank you very much again for this presentation and to the other two panelists. We have some time for questions. Perhaps we can start with the persons that are in the room, and then we can go online if there are any questions. Okay, so the floor is open for questions or comments, reactions. So any questions or comments for our three panelists today? Marie-Josée? Looking for a microphone.
Oh, okay, thanks. It's a question for Arij, actually. You're talking about some people staying in a reactive mode and that maybe we should be more strategic. And my question to you is, what if being in this reactive mode is a strategic move. We've seen that again and again here, politicians making a mistake by saying something, let's say, against immigration, and then they're like, oh, we're so sorry you said that. But the fact that they said it publicly reinforce their base for people that are against immigration. And so I'm thinking maybe in university that happened.
Okay, good. Yes, I always try to enter into the conversations with a healthy amount of skepticism and give the benefit of the possibility that, there is a level of unconsciousness and awareness, not to excuse, that missing some things that one would expect at a leadership level. There is a responsibility to be much more aware. But if, we bring to the attention of colleagues that, look, we are constantly on our heels, and here's the opportunity to be much more strategic, and we begin to suspect that maybe it is a bit of a strategy. It's possible that we then need to figure out who our allies are, who have influence, right? So sometimes those allies aren't necessarily the people in positional in roles of positional leadership, but have influence in the university. So I think, yes, we don't want to be naive to the possibility of both passive and active resistance.
Thank you very much. D'autres questions, commentaires? Oui, Bibiana?
Je vais en français. No, I'll go in English. It's interesting. It's maybe related to Ev's presentation, but I think it could be for the three of us. I think we've been working a lot on inclusive excellence and, trying to find a definition and that. But it's interesting. I wanted to share something because it's interesting because other disciplines in academia are working on different views of inclusive excellence. And last week I was with this team. We work in collaboration with a team that works on sustainable développement durable. And one of the things, and they've been working on that, is, for example, as a researcher, as a professor, you are, how would I say, it's important to do communications, to travel, a lot of traveling during the, starting May to that. And because it's important in your CV. COVID has helped, but we see that there's still, a lot of traveling going on. So I just wanted to know, what's your perspective on that? Like, do we stay online or, we travel? Maybe it was something interesting that came up, and there's other stuff they didn't mention, but I was like, yeah, we've been traveling a lot because we want to present in conferences and that. So I don't know. Just wanted to add. Sorry for this.
It's a balance, I think. I have noticed myself that I'm much more cognizant of footprint, sustainability, in terms of traveling. I've made some choices not to attend, and here I am today, but I was also traveling to the East Coast, and there is something to be said about being in person. So I think it's a balance of accessibility, inclusivity, sustainability. We have all these principles in tension now, and like all good EDI things, just being conscious and thinking about the balance.
I cannot talk about the way, in French, it's going to be easier. Here we have translation. Je ne vais pas parler du point de vue de l'évaluation de l'excellence, parce que c'est vrai, on travaille là-dessus. Mais du point de vue personnel, ayant eu des défis de santé, j'ai vu grandement les bénéfices d'être à distance. C'est beaucoup moins épuisant. Mais en même temps, tu perds la richesse du contact, des discussions au café ou des discussions en allant aux toilettes ou peu importe le soir, qui sont souvent aussi riches que les meetings... donc, mais je pense qu'il faut considérer, je pense qu'il faut changer notre vision comme individu, mais aussi collectivement pour accepter que c'est plus difficile. Mais ce qui est toujours bien vu, puis on les a vus aussi dans les données de Vincent Larivière. Par exemple, les personnes qui ont des enfants à charge, souvent les femmes qui mettent plus de temps, vont moins voyager et donc font moins de collaboration internationale. Et donc, sont pénalisés pour ça au bout du compte. Donc, il faut changer, je pense, notre vision de tous les côtés.
Merci, merci, Harish. Karine, I'd like to give you a chance to react as well. If you have any comments or you want to add something, don't hesitate. You're okay? Okay. Any other comments or questions or reactions from persons in the room? Any comments, questions online? No, nothing online.
Maybe I can add just one comment,
Please.
because I learned something yesterday also. We were at a meeting and Imogen Co was there, and she talked about the cultural difference between, for example, professors and researchers in different area. So she said, for example, in science, if we want to measure excellence, we will measure impact. But what is impact? It's not necessarily the number of publications, but what do you bring to the society? How many people you touch, etc. But she said in some other area, in the human sciences, they had a different vision of what is impact. So even, how can I say that? We have different vision, individual, collectively, in different organization, not organism. And also at different cultural level, if I can say so, scientific level. Yeah.
Is that why it's so difficult? And we've been talking for 30 years about how to review interdisciplinary research, right? Okay, I think we have a comment.
There's someone online, and I was just going to say there's a couple of hands out.
Yeah.
Virtually.
Yes. Yes. We'll go to questions online. Bibiana or Karine?
So Anush had her hand up, and I think she can be unmuted to ask that question. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde et merci beaucoup pour ces présentations vraiment éclairantes. J'aimerais adresser la sous-question du panel qui est le contexte sociopolitique. Et puisqu'on est en train de notre cas, si vous voulez, en ce moment pour le colloque et activement, c'est la question du rôle de dimension. J'aimerais adresser cette question par rapport à dimension. And what I'd like to suggest is that we can also sometimes over-interpret a sociopolitical context. And I would love to hear from the presenters about what I'm thinking. In many ways, the Dimensions program, as I've been reflecting upon it, was a pilot. And I think to myself, in my own kind of thinking about strategic planning and otherwise, why weren't we in 2020 thinking about how we already knew about its success and its impact? Why weren't we thinking about the ways that we can instantiate it beyond the pilot, right? Why weren't we doing the planning and the work to imagine that the end of the pilot was coming up soon? And how do we make sure that it's no longer a pilot? It's a successful pilot. We already had the data. So, and of course, I realize, well, you know, and I thinking about my role on governing council of SSHRC, and I remember something happened in 2020 where we got slammed, and on governing council, our meetings got changed from 2-day meetings to 3-hour meetings. So there wasn't a lot of time, and there wasn't a lot of moment to be thinking strategically. And somehow we all accepted that we would and should be in a panic about everything. So I would like to suggest that even though on the outside there is definitely political polarization, and I wanted to thank Arish for this important point about MIT, and also there was a very important article in the Washington Post yesterday too, about the name changes from DEI also in corporate sectors. But also to think, well, can we, at the moment, actually, I think that there is political power because of the wide-ranging success of the program and all of the work that all of you who are the crucial and important champions and trailblazers in your communities and in the universities and in the colleges and in the government. The work that you have done, for me, indicates that actually there is a momentum, and that also we have a political party in power at the moment that has named a minister in cabinet for diversity and inclusion. So while there is backlash in the US at the moment, and until the end of the 44th Parliament, we have a minister who's specifically responsible and dedicated for that, which we haven't had for a long time. So I just wanted to say that the argument, I would love to hear colleagues on those opportunities, because I see a lot of the comments here and the research that has been presented as being, very important ways in which small changes, like for example, the extraordinary examples and the extraordinary work that Karen Cohen-Sanchez has done, I can attest to that at the University of Ottawa, to make small changes with huge impact. That there is a trend, but that actually not to forget that actually we're in a moment of a majority, and that we're in a moment of power and opportunity in Canada. And I would love to hear what our colleagues think. Merci. Et je serais heureuse de traduire en français si c'est plus simple. Vous me dites.
C'est bon. Merci beaucoup, Anoush, pour ces commentaires. Anyone wants to start? Arish, thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. I think that your invitation to have us be much more thoughtful is something that I was trying to convey in my presentation, and I will be honest in saying that when the Dimensions program began, I was one of the folks that was really trying to understand, is this really the thing that that will help move the dial, or one of the things in a constellation of things that we need to do to move the dial. And so as we sit here today, 5 years later, I'm still grappling with what have we learned, and I think we do have in our collective voices and experiences, as I've been listening to how people perceive that the Dimensions program has been helpful, that before we ourselves move to advocating for either its regeneration or some renewal of the program, I'm feeling we also need to know a little bit more, a little bit more rigorous in understanding, is this the thing that we're advocating for as a sector at this point in time? So I mean, the takeaway for me is we don't spend enough time thinking and planning and really trying to assess what our interventions are. And sometimes we end up spending a lot of money and time and resources on things that, maybe didn't stand a chance to be embedded. So we need to be a little bit more strategic as well. I'm not poo-pooing the Dimensions program. I am just reflecting on the planning process and what have we learned from the planning process. And the answer to why we are here, for me, is curious that it's still speculative because many of us were not at the decision-making table, which is a problem.
Thank you very much, Harish. Other reactions from the...
Can I jump in? Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So it's not a matter of time. We have over 400 years to become inclusive, and it's not happening. And it's not happening because we're not allowing the voices from the marginalized communities to be at the front line. We can talk, we can do panel discussions, we can have committees, unless we are directly involved in change. And changing, and when I mean change, I'm talking about decolonizing our mind and what we feel is prioritization. We have a tendency to pin marginalized groups one against each other. So if we gave funding to Indigenous communities, anti-Black communities will not get it. It's as if it's one or the other. That's not the case. It's a collective approach. And I always say, when one person wins, the entire community wins. It's not just one way of looking at it. It's polarizing off the idea of division. It's mobilizing off the idea of not in my backyard mentality, because it doesn't apply to you, it doesn't matter. I don't know how much more panel discussions or committees that we need to do to realize that this isn't working. And the success in cases that are successfully in incorporating, and I say inclusivity in brackets, are the ones that are led by the individuals that are affected. So one thing that we have to stop viewing is these marginalized communities as charity cases, and that you're assisting and helping them. You're not assisting and helping them when the system has excluded them. They're entitled to these spaces and deserve to be in these spaces. Viewing it from a lens of charity case is what creates a start and end date. Changing that perspective is one approach. And when we change this perspective, is that we are all socially responsible for taking actions. If you're in a position that you could take actions, you have a voice, you have a social responsibility to take that action. And I'll just end there.
Merci beaucoup, Karine, for that very thoughtful comment. I think there are some hands up, or are there any questions in the chat? Looking at my colleagues at the back of the room.
The chat is clear and there are no hands up.
No hands up. Okay.
There were hands up. Il y avait une main précédemment. Est-ce que Nathalie voulait revenir en ligne? Est-ce que la réponse a été donnée?
Okay, I'm going to ask any other comments or questions or reactions after this very, very good panel. Okay, I see no hands up and nothing online as well. So I guess we can take a break. We are a little bit at 6 minutes ahead of schedule. And please join me in thanking the three panelists that we had this morning session.